I am a 36-year-old woman, and for as long as I can remember, I believed my grandmother's love came with a ledger. She tallied everything: how many minutes I was late to set the table, how many grains of rice clung to the pot after I washed it, how many times I let my voice get too big for a girl who should know her place. If I cried, she passed me a towel and told me to aim the tears into the fabric so they wouldn't stain the floor. If I laughed too loud, she tapped the hard bone just below my eye with a fingernail and said, "Pretty things crack." I hated her with the hot, furtive hatred of a child who has nowhere else to go, who learns to hold anger like a coin under the tongue metal and secret. Even now, when I catch myself checking the oven twice or folding dish towels until the edges kiss, I hear her breath at my ear, neater, quieter, smaller. People imagine grandmothers as soft or sugared. Mine was starched, and she made me into something creasable. I became a hospital social worker, ironic maybe to anyone who knew how the women in my family handled feelings. I walked the fluorescent halls of other people's endings and beginnings, listening for the truth inside the avalanche of what's said. I know where silence hides. That skill came from her, though I'd never have given her the credit. She raised me after my mother Mina left when I was 6, taking a midnight bus and a suitcase that had my favorite sticker on it. My father was a photograph in a shoebox, smiling unexceptional, and then abruptly dead in a car accident when I was 2. Grandmother said he was decent, and decency didn't make a story worth telling. The stories she told were about thrift and work, and the dignity of being tolerated. It sounded like a church with a locked door. When grandmother Lillian died in late spring, the town sent lilies and sympathy cards that smelled like dust. I stood at the front of the chapel watching people cry for a woman most of them did not know, and felt nothing but the relief you feel when a fire alarm finally stops. At the reading of the will, my Aunt Ruth adjusted her pearls as if readying her neck for a necklace of property. My mother returned for the funeral eyes, dry and chatty, pretending to mourn the woman she'd fled without looking back. The lawyer, a short man with a poet's hair, read in a voice that turned even furniture into legacy. The house went to Ruth, the savings divided. Then he coughed and said, "To Elise my name, the one grandmother liked, because it sounded like it could be whispered in a quiet room. She leaves the black trunk in the attic and whatever it contains." My mother snorted. "So, she gets the junk." The lawyer slid a small brass key across the oak table toward me. It was warm, as if it had held a pulse. I went to the house alone. The rooms felt smaller without her. The carpet kept the shape of her steps. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon and reprimand. In the attic, the heat pressed against my skin like a hand. The trunk waited beneath the slanted window, its leather scuffed into the kind of beauty you don't notice until you're ready to. I sat on the floorboards and turned the key. The lock gave with a sullen click, a sound I felt in my teeth. Inside, there were layers of folded shawl that still held her faint violet perfume. A faded scarf with my childhood toothpaste stain, a box of buttons heavy as a pocket full of old moons. Beneath those, wrapped in brown paper and tied with cotton string, was a book. It wasn't a book, not exactly. It was a diary. The cover cracked teal, the edges feathered from years of being thumbed and shut. I didn't recognize the handwriting on the first page, tall letters leaning into one another like people carrying a secret through bad weather. My name was the first word. Elise, it began, and my stomach dropped the way it does when an elevator slips. She never wrote me letters. She lectured. She posted rules on the fridge like commandments. My name in her pen felt like a weather change. I read the first line out loud because I needed to hear it hurt. The first time I lied about the baby, it was to save her life. There was no date at the top, just that sentence standing in the white like a figure in a doorway. My breath went rough. I had believed all my life that grandmother didn't lie, that lying was a sin stacked somewhere between leaving your plate dirty and bringing shame to the family. She'd taught me that truth was a blade you kept clean. I flipped to the back, half panicked, looking for dates for a map through the years. There were entries from before I was born after, and more recent ones that ended 6 months ago with a dark, cramped script that looked like it hurt to write. A photograph slipped free from between the pages and landed face down on the floorboards. I reached for it with the fear of someone handling a bomb. On the back in the same hand was a date and a name I didn't know. I turned it over and saw my mother holding a baby whose mouth was a perfect O of outrage. The baby was me. Next to my mother stood grandmother, not yet drawn into the hard lines I knew, and a man with a smile that would have looked charming to anyone but me. I had seen that face before. He was in the shoebox, not my father, but a friend of the family. In the diary directly above the photograph's page, the entry continued. I lied about whose blood you carried, because some men wear goodness like a Sunday shirt. They fold it when the door shuts. There is a particular kind of nausea that comes when the floor under you is still, but your body swears it's moving. I sat there, clutching the diary, thinking about the way grandmother had pinched my shoulders into the posture of a soldier, the way she'd cut me off from certain neighbors, the way she'd clutch at my wrist in the grocery store if a certain man said hello. I'd thought she was jealous of the world. I'd thought she wanted me small so she could feel large. I'd hated her for putting cage bars between me and everything that glowed. And now there was this sentence, this photograph, this key inside a key. Downstairs, the clock in the hallway chimed 4, the hour she always made tea. I realized my hands were shaking. I had spent years telling myself the story that made me the victim of her meanness, and her meanness simple. What if the story was crooked? What if the ledger I was sure she kept wasn't about obedience, but debt, what she owed, and what she was owed, what she would never say out loud because saying it might set off the fuse. On the second page, the ink had bled a little, like she'd been writing too fast for the paper to keep up. I touched my name again, like a bruise. I braced myself for a kind of weather I did not know how to dress for. Then I began to read. The ink felt alive beneath my fingertips, the strokes angled sharp, as though she had written these pages while holding her breath. She wasn't confessing to a priest. She was pouring poison into the only vessel that could hold it, paper. I read the second page with the hunger of someone who has been starving her entire life without knowing it. Elise, she had written. I was 23 when your mother was born. I was not kind, not then, not later. But I was afraid of the man who claimed to love me, afraid of his hands, afraid of the way he owned the air in a room. I stopped the words, tightening my chest. Was she talking about my grandfather? The one she'd never once named? All she ever said when I asked was he's gone, and that's the best thing he ever did for us. I read on. Your mother was his too. But when Mina grew old enough to see, old enough to ask why the walls rattled at night, I told her it was the wind. I told her to stay in bed. I told her never to open the door when I was in the kitchen with him. Lies, Elise. Lies to save her eyes, her memory, her chances. The words blurred. I realized my own mother, who had run away and left me in the hands of this iron woman, wasn't the first casualty. She was just the first who could run. I turned another page and another, my pulse keeping time with every line. The diary uncoiled years of silence. The fights no one had spoken of, the nights she had dragged herself out of bed to press cold cloths against her bruises before church, the way she forged smiles so the neighbors wouldn't whisper. She admitted to pushing my mother away when she began to look too much like him. My mother had been punished for wearing his cheekbones, his sly grin. And then came me. Elise, the next entry said, when your mother came to me with you in her belly, I saw history sharpening its knife. I swore it would not cut again. She did not know whose child you were. She wanted to believe it was Michael's your father, the good man who died. But I knew it was not. I knew it the moment I saw your face, and so I lied. I told her, and everyone else, the child was Michael's. I told the town, the pastor, the graveyard. I made sure the truth was buried with him, because if the other man knew, if he suspected, he would have taken you. Or worse. I dropped the diary on my lap and stared at the photograph again. The man. The one she had written about. He had been at my birthday parties, standing just beyond the fence line. He'd given me quarters for the candy machine, once pressed a stuffed rabbit into my hand at the church picnic. My grandmother had yanked me away that day, the rabbit snatched and tossed into the garbage before we got home. I had hated her then. I had cried for that toy. But now I felt the old memory twist into something darker, more jagged. I turned the page. You will hate me, Elise. I have made sure of it. I needed you to hate me because hatred kept you from seeking what you could not know. I made myself the villain so you would never wander into his arms. The attic air was heavy, and I realized I had been holding my breath too long. My hands trembled as though my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. She had carried this knowledge, this secret storm, and instead of telling me, she had built a cage of cruelty around me to keep me safe. I wanted to slam the diary shut. I wanted to scream at her ghost, to demand why she had chosen silence instead of trust, why she had decided for me what truths I could bear. But another part of me, the part that had walked sterile hospital halls, listening to grief, twisted into strange shapes, recognized her fear. She was a woman born in a time when women's voices carried no weight, when men could crush them with a look, when truth was a liability. She had armored me the only way she knew how, with hardness, with discipline, with coldness. Still, my chest ached. I pressed my forehead against my knees and whispered, "Why didn't you just tell me?" My voice echoed against the roof beams. I flipped forward to the later entries, written shakier, as though her hands had stiffened with age. In one, she admitted to watching me from the doorway as I slept, guilt strangling her as she studied the softness of my face, wondering if she had already ruined me. In another, she confessed to visiting my father's grave at night, whispering apologies to a man who had never been my blood, but who had been drafted into her lie. The last entry stopped me cold. It was written 6 months before she died. Elise, if you ever find this, you will hate me more, or perhaps less. I cannot know. But when I am gone, you may seek answers if you must. Just remember, truth does not heal. It only shifts the wound. I sat there until the attic shadows stretched long, the diary heavy in my lap, my childhood refracted into something I could barely recognize. Every rule she had barked, every sharp word, every slap of disapproval, had they been shackles or shields, I didn't know. What I did know was that the man in the photograph was still alive. I had seen him once at the grocery store years ago, older but unmistakable. He had smiled at me like he knew me. At the time, I thought it was just small-town familiarity. Now the smile clawed at me with new meaning. I pressed the diary to my chest, the key still warm in my pocket. My grandmother's ghost lingered in the attic air, daring me to turn the next page of my own life, to decide whether I would bury the truth with her or dig it up, roots and all. And for the first time in my life, I wanted to dig. The next morning, I woke with the diary still clutched against my chest, as if my body feared it might vanish while I slept. My dreams had been a chaos of voices, my grandmother's sharp reprimands twisting into whispered warnings, my mother's laughter bending into sobs. When I opened my eyes, the world felt fragile, as though one wrong move might crack the air around me. I spent the entire day rereading underlining passages with a trembling pen, trying to stitch together a story that had been splintered into secrets. The more I read, the more questions pulsed in my head. Why had she allowed him anywhere near me at all? Why hadn't she cut him out, completely vanished, moved towns, changed names? But then I remembered who she was. Lillian never ran. She fought by enduring, by standing so still that storms broke themselves against her. That night, I called my mother. It had been months since our last conversation, and when she answered, her voice was bright in that false way she always used, as if her life were a performance she could not afford to step out of. "Elise? I was just thinking about you," she said. "Mom," I interrupted, my voice breaking. "Who was he? Who was the man in that picture?" There was silence. The kind that stretches until it becomes its own kind of sound. I could hear her breathing uneven before she finally said, "You found the trunk." I gripped the phone tighter. "You knew I suspected," she admitted. I could never be sure. I wanted to believe you were Michael's. I had to believe it, because if I didn't..." Her voice cracked like glass. I couldn't face what it meant. I swallowed hard. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because," she whispered, "your grandmother swore me to silence. She said the truth would only hurt you." And God forgive me, I believed her. Her words struck something raw inside me. My mother, who had abandoned me, was now confessing that she had abandoned truth too. A double betrayal wrapped in one sentence. "Do you know where he is?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yes," she said after a pause. "He still lives in town. I see him sometimes." He nods like he wants me to acknowledge him. I never do. That night, after hanging up, I sat in my car outside the old hardware store on Main Street. The lights were dim, the windows reflecting more of the street than the shelves inside. I remembered seeing him here years ago, his hands stained with dust and grease, his smile too easy. My stomach churned as I thought of what my grandmother had written of the violence, the lies, the nights of terror she had locked away. The following week, I saw him. It was almost ordinary, just a Wednesday afternoon, the sun too bright for what I was about to learn. He was on the bench outside the post office, older now, his once dark hair turned thin and gray. His frame slouched like a man who had nothing left to prove. But when his eyes lifted and caught mine, something flickered. Recognition, familiarity, ownership. I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, but my feet betrayed me. I approached, clutching my bag to my chest like armor. "Elise," he said before I could speak, his voice smooth and unshaken, as if he had rehearsed this moment for years. My stomach twisted. "You know my name." "Of course I do," he said, leaning back, his smile thin. "You're my granddaughter's girl." The lie hung in the air like smoke. I felt my pulse in my throat, heavy and hot. I wanted to scream at him, to demand the truth, but my grandmother's words echoed, "Some men wear goodness like a Sunday shirt." He was still wearing his. I whispered, "You're not my grandfather." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, then amusement, then something colder. "Your grandmother talked too much." The certainty in his tone, the way he said her name with disdain, made my hands shake. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. "She protected me from you." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a hiss. "She poisoned you against me. I should have been the one raising you. You're mine." The words hit me like a physical blow. Mine. The way he claimed me, like property, like inheritance. I understood then what my grandmother had been fighting all along. Not just his fists, not just his cruelty, but his entitlement, the way he believed people belonged to him. I turned and walked away before he could finish his sentence. My legs trembled so badly, I thought they might collapse, but I forced myself to keep going, each step heavier than the last. That night, I returned to the diary. I read the entries again, slower this time, hearing her voice between the lines. She had built her life into a fortress, and yes, she had locked me inside it. But now I knew why. Her cruelty had been her armor, and she had worn it even when it hurt me, because she had decided pain was better than possession. I closed the diary gently for the first time, not out of anger, but out of reverence. She had not been the monster I thought she was. She had been the soldier. Still, the wound inside me pulsed, because soldiers leave casualties, and I had been one of them. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the diary open before me, a mug of untouched tea cooling at my elbow. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, the sly curve of his smile, the way he said mine, as if the word itself could brand me. The sound of it crawled under my skin. I wanted to tear it out, scrub it clean, but it lingered. The next day, I went to work, as if nothing had changed. I smiled at families in the waiting room, offered tissues to mothers, gripping the hands of their sick children, nodded at fathers with their jaws set tight against fear. But inside, I was hollow, a shell rattling with echoes of truths I didn't want to carry. My grandmother's words followed me down every hallway. Truth does not heal, it only shifts the wound. And yet as the days passed, I realized something new was blooming inside me. Not just grief, not just rage, but a sharp, dangerous clarity. For years, I had believed myself powerless, the child of a vanished mother and a tyrant grandmother. But now, I saw it differently. I was the keeper of their secrets, the heir to their battles. The wound was mine, yes, but so was the choice of what to do with it. One evening, as the sky bruised purple over the town, I found myself driving to the cemetery. My grandmother's headstone was plain, just her name and dates, no verse, no embellishment. She would have approved. I stood there, with the diary pressed against my chest, whispering the words I had never said when she was alive. I hated you, I admitted, my voice breaking. I hated you for years. And maybe I'll always hate the way you chose silence over trust. But now I understand. You saved me. You carried this war so I could live without knowing its fire. I see that now. And I don't know if forgiveness is possible, but gratitude might be. The wind shifted, lifting my hair from my face. For a fleeting moment, I felt something loosen inside me, a chain falling away. But gratitude wasn't enough. Every time I saw him on the street, every time I imagined him watching me as I grew up, the rage rose again, scorching. He had stolen too much. My mother's peace, my grandmother's softness, my own childhood, and he had walked free untouched, his smile still intact. That night, I made a decision. I was going to confront him, not as the trembling girl he once tried to claim, but as the woman I had become. I found him 2 days later, at the diner, sitting alone in a booth near the window, sipping coffee. The place smelled of grease and old linoleum, the kind of air that clings to you. I slid into the seat across from him before I could lose my nerve. His eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed into that same knowing smirk. "Elise," he said smoothly. "I knew you'd come around." My hands shook, but I kept my voice steady. "You're wrong. I didn't come here for you. I came here for me." He chuckled, leaning back. "You've got her fire, your grandmother's. She never knew when to quit." I stared at him, every muscle in my body taut. She didn't quit. She beat you. Every day you didn't have me was her victory. His jaw tightened, the smirk faltering. She poisoned you. No, I said firmly, leaning closer so he couldn't mistake my words. She saved me, and now I'm going to save myself. You don't own me. You never did. You're nothing but a man who mistook cruelty for power. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes, doubt, maybe even fear. It wasn't enough to erase the years, but it was enough for me. I stood my chair, scraping the floor, and walked out without another word. The sun was blinding as I stepped outside, but I didn't shield my eyes. I wanted the light. I wanted it to burn. That night back home, I opened the diary one last time. I read her final words again, her shaky script etched into my mind. Truth does not heal it, only shifts the wound. She had been right. The wound was mine now. But unlike her, I didn't plan to let it fester in silence. I was going to tell my story about the cruelty, the secrets, the lies, and the love hidden inside even the harshest walls. I was going to break the cycle, because I wasn't just her granddaughter. I was her legacy, and legacies are not meant to be caged. They are meant to rise. Weeks passed, and I felt like I was walking through a landscape rebuilt from rubble. Everything familiar looked the same on the outside, the streets of our small town, the clapboard houses, the grocery store with its flickering sign. But inside me, the ground had shifted. I carried the diary everywhere, tucked in my bag like a relic, as though the weight of it could anchor me. My mother tried to call. I let it ring more often than not. When I did answer, her voice was shaky, threaded with guilt she'd buried for decades. Elise. I was young. I didn't know how to fight her or him. I thought leaving was the only way I could breathe. I listened, but said little. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to believe she was a victim too, just another woman caught in his orbit. But another part of me, the child left behind, felt her absence like a scar. I wasn't ready to stitch that wound closed. Not yet. What I couldn't shake was the memory of his voice in the diner. The way he leaned forward, calling me mine, as if decades hadn't passed, as if my life had been waiting for his claim. That single word replayed in my head like a splintered record. Each time my anger grew sharper, more precise. I realized something important then. Revenge wasn't about hurting him. It was about reclaiming myself. About tearing his claim to pieces so small he could never hold them again. I started with the truth. I told my closest friend, first a colleague from the hospital, who had seen me through long nights of grief and exhaustion. We sat in her car with the windows rolled up, and I recited the story as if it were scripture. My grandmother's cruelty, her diary, the man's twisted shadow across all our lives. She cried before I did, reaching for my hand. "You have to tell it," she said. "You can't let it rot in silence. That's how men like him survive." Her words struck deep. That night, I sat at my desk and began writing my own story, line by line. Not just the diary's revelations, but the way they had shaped me, the girl who grew up hating her grandmother. The woman who discovered hate was a disguise for love. The truth that cut, but also freed. The pages filled quickly, as though the story had been waiting for me to give it air. When I finished, I didn't hide it. I shared it with my mother, with my aunt, with the pastor, who had always spoken kindly of Mr. Whitaker, never knowing the venom behind his smile. I let them read the words, let them sit with the discomfort of truth. Some denied it. "He was always generous," my aunt protested, her pearls trembling against her throat. "This is your grandmother's bitterness speaking from the grave." But others listened. The pastor wept. A neighbor told me she'd once heard shouts from my grandmother's house late at night, but she'd been too afraid to knock. Piece by piece, the silence that had cocooned him began to crack. And then, one evening, I saw him again. Not on a bench or at the diner, but in the parking lot outside the grocery store. His face was lined deeper now, his gait slower, but his eyes still held that gleam of entitlement. He looked at me as if daring me to flinch. I didn't. I walked past him, my head high, the diary heavy in my bag. For the first time, I didn't feel the old panic clawing at my chest. He was just a man smaller than the shadow he had cast, diminished by truth. In that moment, I realized my grandmother had been right and wrong all at once. Truth hadn't healed me, not in the way I wanted. It hadn't erased the scars or softened the memories. But it had shifted the wound into something I could name, something I could hold without breaking. And in that shift, there was power. The last time I opened her diary, I read her words differently. Where once I had seen cruelty, now I saw sacrifice. Where I had seen silence, now I heard protection. She had loved me in the only way she knew how, even if it meant being hated for it. And maybe that was the truest kind of love, the kind that demands nothing in return, not even forgiveness. I placed the diary back in its box, locked the trunk, and slid the key onto a chain around my neck. Not to guard the secret anymore, but to carry the reminder that survival sometimes looks like cruelty, that protection sometimes looks like betrayal, and that truth, no matter how jagged, will always find its way to the surface. I am 36 years old, and for the first time in my life, I do not hate my grandmother. I see her. I see the woman who stood between me and a man who would have claimed me, who gave me the chance to grow into someone who could tell the story she never could. And this telling is my revenge, my reclamation, my inheritance. So, if you're still here listening to my story, I want you to take something with you. Secrets do not die in silence. They wait heavy as stone until someone is brave enough to lift them. And when you do, you may find pain, but you may also find freedom. If this story has touched you, if it made you think of your own family's buried truths, I hope you'll like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe for more stories like mine. And please leave a comment. Tell me what you would have done if you were me. Because stories like this don't belong in diaries alone. They belong in the open where no one can hide again.